This is the former UN Dutch compound near Srebrenica. Today, it's empty. But 15 years ago, on the 11th of July, this area was filled with thousands of Bosnian Muslims seeking refuge. Not all of them would be saved. Sabra Kalinovic worked for the UN peacekeeping forces in Srebrenica from the time they first arrived in 1993 until the town fell 2 years later. She remembers when UN General Philippe Morillon claimed Srebrenica as safe haven and promised to protect them. But the promise had been broken, and she blames the United Nations for allowing some 8,000 Muslim men and boys to be killed.
When General Morillon arrived in Srebrenica in '93, we thought the war was over. We are under the protection of the United Nations, and today I think they need to also answer to justice.
Bringing the United Nations to justice for what has been called Europe's worst atrocity since World War II. This is what the families of the victims and some survivors hope to do. They are suing the United Nations for failing to prevent genocide. But it won't be easy. This is what Srebrenica looked like on the 11th of July 1995, when close to 40,000 Bosnian Muslims sought refuge here. But when it fell to the Bosnian Serb Forces led by Ratko Mladic, the refugees headed for the UN Dutch compound in the nearby town of Potocari. It was up to some 400 lightly armed UN peacekeeping soldiers to protect them. The Dutch soldiers looked on as the men were separated from the women and children who were eventually bussed out of Bosnian Serb territory. Most of the men met a different fate. Fazila Efendic runs this souvenir shop, which is across from the cemetery. Her husband is buried there. Her son's remains have yet to be found. She says it was her husband who convinced her to seek refuge at the UN compound.
We were thrown out of our homes and we fled towards the United Nations compound. It was the Dutch battalion and we thought it was safe, that we were saved. But no one was saved. We were handed over to the Serbs. They did whatever they wanted. Those they took away, they killed. They spared the women and children, but they took the men and they killed them. It was terrifying. I was there for 2 nights. It was awful, terrible, terrible. If at least someone had filmed or recorded this, today people can say what they want, whatever they want, and everything can seem believable, since there's nothing recorded.
Someone who did start filming was this man, former UN Dutch Bat soldier Wim Dekema. But he was told to stop filming by his commander for fear of angering the Serb soldiers.
Over 25,000.
Dekema, like many other Dutch soldiers who were there, knew something was going on, but he never imagined that a genocide was about to start.
They were meant for the hospital. If somebody would have told me then they will all be killed, I wouldn't have believed them. Really, I wouldn't. I mean, we all knew that the whole world was watching. Everybody knew. Outside the enclave, everybody knew more about the whole thing than we did. And nobody did anything. We didn't get air support, nothing. Some of our colleagues I admired because they were 20, 22 years old and they did the very, very best they could to help. But we couldn't do anything. We had a bottle of water and 1 piece of bandage. That's it.
What actually happened the days before and after July 11th, 1995 is what Dutch lawyer Axel Hagedorn is after. He is representing the mothers of Srebrenica and other survivors who are suing the UN and the Netherlands. He says it was the Dutch government which blocked calls by the UN soldiers for NATO airstrikes, but it was the UN which failed to prevent genocide. A complicated case which is yet to be granted a trial.
Why are you suing the United Nations?
Because what is happening in the last 15 years, the Dutch say we were abandoned by the United Nations, which is not true. And the United Nations are immune. So what is the risk if you only sue one or the other? If you only sue the Dutch state, then they say we were under UN mandate. and then they cannot be charged, maybe. And if you only sue the United Nations said, we are immune. So therefore you have to sue them at the same time, and you have to see what actions, not preventing the genocide, is eligible for which party.
The Srebrenica genocide was a failure to protect human rights, one of the founding principles in the UN Charter. But UN immunity is also in its founding charter, and last March a Dutch Court of Appeals upheld this immunity. The mothers of Srebrenica now plan to take their case before the European Court of Justice. They are arguing for justice but also for compensation. Shahida Abdurrahmanovic came back to Srebrenica in 2002. She lost her husband and other male relatives during the war in Bosnia. She blames the UN but says the Dutch battalion could have done more.
The number of UN soldiers is no excuse. They're manipulating this by saying they were few in numbers. From past experience, I always thought they were the strongest, a force without fail, which is logical. They could have easily got help. No one would have refused them if they'd asked for it.
Wouter Wijnkock was 21 years old when he served under the UN Dutch battalion. He's been back twice to Srebrenica and has met with some of the women who lost their men. He says he understands their anger and sorrow, but he won't apologize. He did the best he could. He agrees they should sue the UN so the mothers will understand.
And maybe that's for me the reason to still find the truth. I want to know what man at what position in the United Nations or France or United States or which other country, which man had the plan to not help there, to let the enclave fall down. That is what I want to know. So the Muslim woman would have someday the time and the moment that they understand it was not the fault of the Dutch soldiers, but it was the fault of the United Nations or the Dutch government or which government.
On the 15th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide, the hope is that soon there will be some answers and some justice. A justice for those on both sides of the UN compound who felt that the world had left them alone to face one of Europe's most tragic chapters in its recent history.